Hi, I'm Laureline. My sister spit in my soup ate a celebration for our mother's recovery. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just switched the bowls. She ended up in the ER that night. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was years of being erased from family photos, menus, memories. They said I was too sensitive, said I was imagining things, until the cameras proved otherwise. Have you ever realized your family was rewriting history without you in it? What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you made you invisible? I showed up late on purpose. Not late enough to raise eyebrows, just enough to keep them from focusing on me. The valet barely looked at me as I stepped out of my car. Inside the restaurant, the lighting was warm, golden, curated for Instagram memories and fabricated laughter. A boutique French spot nestled along the edge of Santa Rosa's more polished neighborhoods, Celine's kind of place. Expensive without screaming for it, pretentious without needing to try. As soon as I walked through the front, I caught Celine's voice before I even saw her. It rose above the music like it always did, smooth and just loud enough to signal ownership of the room. She was in full performance mode, when seen the act 100 times over. I smiled thinly at the hostess and made my way toward the private dining area. The long table was set with tall crystal glasses, folded linen napkins, and place cards in looping gold script. Mine had been pushed slightly off-center. Not torn, not missing, just off. Like me. "Look who finally made it," Celine called, standing to greet me with arms open and a smile too symmetrical to be sincere. We were about to send out a search party. I leaned in for the obligatory air kiss. "Well, lucky for me, you didn't. I'd hate to be a missing person at my own mother's celebration." She chuckled lightly, eyes flicking over my dress, her mouth curving in a practiced smirk. "You look comfortable." I didn't take the bait. Instead, I greeted our mother sitting like a glass figurine at the head of the table, delicate and over-decorated. She squeezed my hand a little too tightly, as if that made up for what she wouldn't say. I slid into my chair-own of the few without direct sightlines to the center. Naturally. As the dinner began, I floated, smiled, nodded, laughed at the stories being told about Celine's latest professional campaign like I hadn't been the one who helped edit the damn pitch deck 2 years ago. I wasn't here to claim credit. I was here to be present. Soup was the first coarse creamy butternut squash, with a swirl of creme fraiche and toasted pepitas. It arrived silently in front of me. The server's hands were swift and trained, leaving behind aroma and anticipation. I excused myself to the restroom, needed a break from the soft buzz of social performance, from the corners of the room, from the way my mother kept adjusting her pearls every time someone praised Celine. When I returned, something subtle off-caught my eye. A shift in posture, a quietness in Celine's grin. She leaned forward, her hand barely brushing the rim of my soup bowl. Her lips moved. Then it happened. A quick, deliberate motion, so slight it could have been missed, if not for the mirror behind the wine chiller reflecting everything. Celine spit into my soup. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip. It was a statement. She didn't know I saw. I stood there for a second, hands at my sides, stomach turning not because of the soup. Because of the history behind that spit. Because of every eye roll, every undermining comment, every story she retold where I was the punchline. Because of every time she told someone, "Laureline? Oh, she's just around." I walked back to the table like nothing had happened, took my seat, smiled as a guest complimented the flower arrangements. And then, without pause, I reached forward and switched our bowls. She was too caught up laughing at her own joke to notice. I didn't eat. She did. Her spoon dipped, swirled, lifted. Her smile was radiant as she savored her sabotage, unaware that the joke, this time, wasn't mine. I stared at my untouched bowl, letting the silence fill me. Not the room's silence mine. The kind that held decades. The time she told my high school boyfriend I cheated on him, he left me for her. The way she accidentally stole my graduation speech by getting a nosebleed during my turn. The time she RSVP'd for both of us to a cousin's wedding, but forgot to give me the invite. I'd swallowed every slight. Let her take center stage. Let her write the family's narrative with my name left out of the cast list. But not tonight. I wasn't going to flip the table. I wasn't going to scream. That's not the kind of woman I am. That's not the kind of woman I've ever been allowed to be. But I would remember this moment. Celine lifted her glass for a toast. To Mom, she said, and to second chances. Everyone clinked. I didn't. Instead, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, let her swallow what she served. The soup may have been swallowed, but the aftertaste stayed with me, thicker than the butternut, heavier than the silence I'd wrapped myself in. I sat through the rest of that first course with a smile that felt stapled to my face, nodding at comments I wasn't invited to respond to. My sister laughed like she hadn't just crossed a line that couldn't be redrawn. The room shifted slowly. More guests filtered in as the main dinner hour approached. Family I hadn't seen in years. College friends of Celine's, and what looked like newer acquaintances, business partners maybe. The kind who wear their net worth in watch bands and polished veneers. Celine floated from person to person, arm hooked into our mother's, both of them glowing in curated grace. Introductions started. Of course, Celine led. This is our dear friend Tara, VP at Sterling & Co. She and Cormac go way back. Uncle Ron and Aunt Bev flew in from Arizona, bless them. She reached one hand toward me, barely glancing over. And that's Laura Linnamy's sister. She's always helping behind the scenes. My name passed like lint. No pause, no warmth. Just an obligatory note in her performance script. I stayed near the bar, sipping sparkling water and counting the seconds until I could go home. A woman I didn't recognize approached, smiling in that too polite way. Her dress screamed money, and her tone was laced with entitlement, masquerading as charm. "Excuse me," she said, glancing at the glasses on a tray near me. "Would you mind topping this off? I think we're low on champagne at the back table." I blinked. "Sorry?" Before I could say anything more, Celine appeared like she'd been summoned. "Oh no, Nosha's not with catering," she said with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "She's family. But she's always keeping things running." The woman gave a half smile and walked off like nothing had happened. A few others nearby chuckled lightly, the way people do when they're uncomfortable but don't want to rock the boat. I smiled too. That's what I was supposed to do. Inside, something cracked. It wasn't new. It had been cracking for years. But this time, I didn't try to patch it. I wandered toward the back of the room, stood beside a framed print of our family crest, and let my eyes blur over the gold lettering. The music hummed. Silverware clinked. People toasted and laughed and called out Celine's name like she was the mayor of the damn place. I remembered the graduation party. Mine. The one where she had a last-minute appendicitis scare and everyone forgot why we were there. Or the time Mom gave Celine the necklace that belonged to Grandma, even though she had promised it to me when I was 16. Or when my name was misprinted on a wedding program lorry instead of Laureline, and no one ever corrected it. When you've been misnamed enough times, I thought, you stop correcting people. I wasn't essential. I was nice to have around. I was reliable. I was the one who could be counted on not to make things messy. I turned and saw Veda, my daughter, standing at the far end of the room with a plate of fruit in one hand, quietly watching. 14 years old, curious eyes taking in everything. That's when the thought hit me hard. If I keep swallowing this, what is she learning about how women should be treated in families like ours? I didn't leave. I didn't cry in the restroom. I stayed, planted, watching, waiting. Celine was mid-conversation with someone when a server approached me with a small folded menu. "I believe this is yours," he said gently. I unfolded it. Every name printed in gold foil, arranged by course and seat. Mine was there scribbled in last, with black ballpoint ink, crooked and fading. Not printed, not planned. Scribbled. It wasn't just my name that was missing. It was pieces of me cut out, erased, blurred at the edges like it only ever been a shadow. I sat there holding the menu like it was evidence in a trial, and in a way, it was. Everyone else's name was elegantly printed, engraved in gold cursive that shimmered under the warm glow of the chandeliers. Mine, scribbled in shaky ballpoint pen, tilted, rushed, smudged. As if someone had added it last minute, reluctantly, with no time to spare. I brushed a fingertip over the ink. It was still damp. A young server, probably no older than 22, leaned in as he cleared a nearby plate. He glanced at the menu, then lowered his voice. "Your sister finalized the list this morning," he said, with an apologetic shrug. "Guess your name didn't make the print run." I didn't flinch, didn't speak. I just gave him a slow nod and folded the menu in half, creasing the edge like I was sealing away a piece of the truth I already knew. Across the room, Selene was mid-laugh, head tossed back, surrounded by people who had always adored her. She was retelling a story I remembered clearly, because it had been mine once, but she was the one shining now, passing it off as if it belonged to her. That was her gift. Take what want hers, polish it with charm, and present it like a family heirloom. I slipped away from the table. The party had spilled into the adjacent lounge, where someone had mounted a canvas collage for guests to admire. A sweeping title scrolled across the top in fancy script. Legacy, a decade of love. At first, I kept my distance. Then I felt myself drawn in, one hesitant step after another. I scanned the photo snapshots from birthdays, holidays, graduations, and backyard barbecues. All familiar, all real. But I wasn't in them, or rather, I was barely. A blurry silhouette in the background here, the back of my head there. One frame showed me setting up chairs while Selene posed front and center, beaming with a wine glass raised like a trophy. I stared at that one the longest. A cousin drifted up beside me, holding a mimosa. She squinted at the collage. "Were you not at the 2016 reunion?" "I think that's the only one you're missing from." "I was there," I said softly. She blinked. "Oh, maybe you just didn't get in any pictures." "No, I took the pictures." I stepped back, the collage warping before my eyes. It no longer felt like family history, it felt like a stage play, a curated narrative where the spotlight had always been pre-assigned. And I was the lighting crew, never meant to be seen. There was a time, not too long ago, when I would have laughed it off, tossed out some line about being camera shy or better behind the scenes. But the ache in my chest said otherwise. These weren't simple oversights. These were choices. Repeated, deliberate choices. And the most painful part? I had let them happen. I looked around the room. These were people I'd known my whole life. People I'd driven to the hospital, helped move apartments, covered bills for. They were sipping champagne, complimenting the decor, enjoying the food, every bit of which I had quietly helped coordinate and fund. But no one mentioned that. No one even glanced in my direction. They remembered Selena's speech, her dress, her curated smile. And once again, I stood there, present in body, invisible in every other way. A ghost with a pulse. I returned to my seat, but something in me had shifted. I pulled out my phone and opened a message to Veda, my mentee, who'd been struggling with a toxic work situation. "Don't let anyone shrink you into a supporting role in your own life," I wrote. "Not your boss, not your friends, and especially not your family." I hovered for a moment. Then I hit send. When I looked up, Selene was walking toward me, phone in hand, smile wide, too wide, the kind of smile that wasn't meant for me but for the audience watching. "Ready for group photos?" she called out, her voice bright and loud enough to draw attention. "Let's make sure everyone's in this time." Everyone. Her eyes didn't meet mine, but her message did. And this time, I didn't smile back. Some of us had already learned how to stay out of frame. I stood back, arms loosely crossed, as Selene posed dead center in every photo. She shifted slightly with each click, changing angles like she was prepping for a magazine spread. No one seemed to notice I wasn't in the shot. No one asked. I wasn't angry yet. Just removed. Detached. The way someone becomes after 100 cuts too small for anyone else to see. Dessert was being cleared when it happened. One moment, Celine was smiling. The next, she stumbled forward, her wineglass shattering against the floor. Her body hit the ground like a sack of porcelain. A murmur surged through the room, followed by gasps and chairs scraping back. Cormac reached her first, crouched low, calling her name in a voice that tried hard to sound calm but cracked at the edges. People hovered. Waitstaff radioed for assistance. I stayed still. And then it started, the whispers. Is she allergic to something? Did she eat anything unusual? Someone else, quieter, leaned in to a neighbor. I saw her switch bowls during the soup course. That got everyone's attention. I turned my head slowly. That's all it took. One glance from me, and suddenly every eye was asking the same silent question. A few minutes later, I was asked, more like nudged into a hallway behind the main dining room. Irene stood there with that pressed lip smile she used when she wanted something unpleasant to pass without incident. Beside her, two aunts whose names I barely used anymore. And Cormac, arms folded, eyes avoiding mine. You were sitting next to her, one aunt said, voice syrupy. We just want to be sure everything's okay. Cormac added, Did anything happen during dinner? Any chance she was stressed? You know how she internalizes things. I looked at each of them, one by one. Their expressions were painted concern. But I've lived too long not to recognize performance when I see it. I swapped our bowls, I said, calm as glass. Because she spit in mine. No one spoke. Irene blinked. What do you mean? She leaned over and spit into my soup when she thought I wasn't looking. So I switched the bowls. That doesn't sound like Celine, one of the aunts muttered, as if that meant anything. She didn't know I saw her, I continued. But I did. In the wine chiller's reflection. And I didn't feel like eating whatever she thought I deserved. Cormac shifted his weight, suddenly very interested in the tile floor. Irene opened her mouth, but I raised my hand slightly. Don't explain it away. Don't tell me she was under pressure or trying to be funny. She did it because she could. Because she's always been able to. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding, Irene said. Too quick, too polished. I tilted my head. Do you think I'm lying? No, she said slowly. But it just doesn't make sense. It never has, I replied. But I'm done making room for it. The silence was thicker now, not awkward exposed. I won't apologize, I said evenly, for refusing to eat her cruelty. It was the first time it said something like that and not second-guessed it. I didn't care how it sounded. I didn't care if it made anyone uncomfortable. For the first time, I didn't need them to believe me. I believed myself. I turned and walked back toward the dining room, passing the stunned faces of guests who had heard only pieces and filled in the rest. The music had stopped. Forks rested untouched. People stared as I re-entered, not dramatically, just present. Let them watch. But they weren't the only ones watching that night. Veda had been standing by the far window when I returned to the dining room, her small frame almost hidden behind a curtain. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her eyes told me everything she saw me, fully. And for the first time, that was enough. The room never truly recovered from my confession. Conversations quieted, glances sharpened, but no one dared bring it up again, not openly. Even Cormac couldn't meet my gaze. Celine, of course, was escorted out by staff and an ambulance within minutes. She wasn't unconscious, just overwhelmed. Or so they said. It didn't matter. Back in the hallway, I felt a shadow fall beside me. Irene. She said nothing at first, just stood there, arms crossed as if shielding herself from a wind that never blew. After a moment, she sighed. You've always been so sensitive. I didn't respond. There was no point. I waited for an apology, for a flicker of recognition. But all I got was a mother trying to patch over a crack in the drywall with duct tape. Later that evening, I found myself sitting near the nurse's station at the hospital, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in hand. I heard my mother's voice echo from down the hall as she spoke to a nurse behind the check-in counter. "She's Selena's sister," the nurse said, pointing my way. "Next of kin?" Irene hesitated. "Selene is the oldest. And the other daughter, oh, Laura?" My name caught in her throat like an afterthought. "Laureline?" I corrected softly. The nurse nodded with a gentle smile. My mother didn't flinch. She just turned away. We returned home just before midnight. Veda went upstairs without a word, her face tired in a way that felt too old for 14. I wandered into the guest room, the one that used to be mine, before Selene turned it into a storage closet for party supplies and off-season clothes. I stood still for a while before moving toward the bottom drawer of the old writing desk, the one that stuck halfway and always needed a gentle kick. Inside was a mess of old birthday cards, mismatched batteries, and a stack of faded envelopes wrapped in a rubber band. I flipped through them absent-mindedly until one stopped me. My name. Handwritten in that delicate, careful script Irene reserved for Christmas cards. It was sealed, dated 11 years ago. I opened it. "Laureline, I know I treat Selena differently. She needs praise. You just manage. Sometimes I think you don't need me. And maybe I've used that as an excuse to step back. But I do notice. Even if I don't say it, I notice you hold things together when no one else does. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. I read it twice, then again. The letter didn't rewrite the past. It didn't excuse the name mistakes or the silences, but it cracked something open in. Understanding I hadn't wanted, but maybe needed. Some wounds weren't just about being forgotten. They were about never being seen in the first place. I sat on the edge of the bed, letter still in hand, thinking about how many times it swallowed pride, let moments pass, let people laugh. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in that burning, helpless way. I was tired, but I was clear. I pulled out a small frame from the bottom drawer, cheap one, meant for an old photo. I slipped the letter inside and placed it on the nightstand. Not to forgive, but to remember, and to stop rewriting it in my head. Before going to bed, I walked down the hallway and slid a folded note under Veda's door. "Your name will never be misplaced in this family, not while I'm alive." I turned off the lights, ready to finally rest. As I closed the drawer, another voice startled me from behind. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," I said. "And you're not ready for what I kept." I didn't flinch. Not when Selene hissed my name like it was beneath her teeth. Not when she spat out her last line like she still had the final word. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I walked past the valet stand, heels crunching softly against the gravel path. There was no anger left in me. No need to scream. What I felt now wasn't rage, it was clarity. I wasn't running away from a confrontation. I was walking straight toward something I'd held onto for weeks. Something precise. Something undeniable. Proof. The night air was cool against my skin as I slid into my car and started the engine. I drove back across town, my hands steady on the wheel, headlights slicing through the quiet. The restaurant parking lot was almost empty by then, the party long over, but I could see a few staff cleaning up through the windows. The manager, a man named Theo, was behind the bar, stacking glasses. He looked up as I walked in. "Miss? I need 5 minutes. Alone, if possible." He hesitated, uncertain. "Is something wrong?" "Depends," I said. "Do you still keep surveillance footage from the dining room?" He straightened. "There's one camera, above the wine display." "Why?" "I think you already know." 10 minutes later, we were in a small office behind the kitchen, the kind of space that smelled faintly of bleach and old receipts. A monitor blinked to life. Theo pulled up the footage from earlier that afternoon, time-stamped and silent. We watched. There she was, Selena dressed in cream silk and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned over the table casually, as if adjusting the silverware. but her eyes darted to the left, to the right. Then, in one slow, deliberate movement, she tilted her head and spit into my bowl. Not a joke, not a mistake, a decision. She straightened, laughed to herself, and sat down like nothing had happened. My jaw didn't clench. My hands didn't shake. I just kept watching. Another angle showed her waving to the waiter. She pointed to her head, mimed a quick motion with her fingers, as if something had slipped her mind. The waiter nodded. A few minutes later, he returned with a different bowl, slightly lighter broth, different garnish. Her soup. 2 bowls, 1 message. She knew exactly what she was doing, and exactly which one was meant for me. I turned to Theo. "Can I get a copy?" He looked at me for a long moment, then pulled out a USB stick from a drawer. "I don't want to be involved." "You're not," I said softly. "You're just showing me what's already been done." He handed it over. I left with a quiet thank you and walked into the night. Back home, the house was still. Veda was asleep. I moved silently through the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. I slid the USB in and hit play again, not because I needed to, but because part of me still didn't believe it. And yet, there it was. Frame by frame, her intent, her betrayal. I emailed it to myself twice. Once to my main account. Once to a private cloud I rarely used. Then, I sent it to my lawyer with a message that read, "Just in case this escalates." I opened the family group chat, the same thread where they sent photos of Selini's new kitchen renovation and ignored my messages for weeks. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed, "Subject," for anyone who's curious. But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I created a folder on my desktop. Selini Truth. Inside, I dropped the video. Then I opened my phone's gallery and started capturing screenshots, clear ones. Her face. Her gestures. The moment the bowls were switched. I started a checklist on paper. Print visuals, draft timeline, call attorney again. Tell Veda the full truth before it goes public. I sat there, at the edge of my bed, rereading the message that I hadn't sent. Again. And again. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It wasn't even about shaming her. It was about reclaiming something she had tried to steal me name. My voice, my dignity. This time, I wouldn't let it slide. Morning came, soft and silver, like the calm after a storm. I hadn't slept much, but I felt awake, clear, grounded, ready. At 7:32 a.m., the family group chat lit up. "Cormac, we need to talk. Tonight. All of us." I didn't answer. I just smiled. They had no idea what had already set in motion. They had no idea what had already set in motion. By the time I pulled into Celine and Cormac's long, too-perfect driveway, the sun was starting to melt into the trees. Golden light flickered off the manicured lawn, and the house stood there pristine, curated, almost smug. White candles glowed from each window, and not a single trace of life a toy, a stray shoe, even a smudge on the glass dared exist out of place. It was exactly how Celine liked it. Flawless from a distance, hollow once you stepped inside. I didn't turn off the engine, just sat there, staring. Next to me, Veda adjusted her seatbelt but said nothing. Her presence was steady, like a grounding wire. "You don't have to come in," I told her. She glanced at the house, then at me. "I won't. Unless you call. If I hear your voice crack, I'm coming through that door." I nodded. We didn't need more words than that. I stepped out, my phone tight in my hand, like a weapon not for attack, but for surgery. I wasn't walking into a conversation. I was walking into a final extraction. What I planned to cut out today wasn't Celine or even Cormac. It was something older, something that had been growing quietly inside me for years. The need to be accepted by people who thrived off my erasure. When I opened the front door, they were already arranged like a theater set. Irene was curled in her usual spot on the couch, her posture rigid, her lips pressed so thin they nearly disappeared. Cormac stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, acting neutral as if he weren't part of all this. And Celine. Celine sat front and center, like a child trying to look innocent while hiding a broken vase behind her back. Cormac began. We're all here because things have gotten a little out of hand. Nobody wants this kind of tension. We thought maybe it's time to talk things through. Together. Celine chimed in, her voice soft and sweet, coated in her usual artificial grace. It's just all been so confusing, really. I think we can all admit emotions were high. I almost laughed. That tone, that expression. I'd seen it all before. The innocent act, the fake mediation. She wasn't confused. She was performing just like always. I didn't reply. I raised my phone and tapped once. Before or after this? The screen lit up. I turned it toward them. A screenshot of the family group text, clear as day, projected on the living room TV. One message, under Celine's name, sent just before the gallery event. Let her sit in the back. It's where she belongs. No one moved. Celine blinked first. That was meant for Cormac. I thought I was texting him privately. You didn't delete it, I said, cutting her off. You didn't apologize. You left it there like a name tag, like a label I was supposed to accept. A long, jagged silence followed. Not defensive, not remorseful, just caught. Irene glanced at Celine, but said nothing. Celine started to fumble through an excuse stress, planning, miscommunication, but I didn't let her finish. I tapped the phone again. A new file. This time, it airdropped directly to the television. The video started playing. Volume low, but clear enough. It had been recorded by Veda during the gallery opening. Celine, standing near the bar, leaned in toward a server and said, "Don't let her drink. She'll embarrass us again." The words landed like a slap, but it wasn't just the words. It was her expression. That small, smug smirk, the tone of superiority. Gasps rippled from the hallway. One cousin, who had apparently come late and stayed quiet in the corner, stood up and left without a word. Cormac's jaw tensed. Irene didn't blink, but her face shifted ever so slightly. She hadn't believed I had proof. Now she did. I stepped forward. Calm, measured. I didn't come here to argue. I came to end the pretending. I've been called dramatic, difficult, too sensitive, when really, I've just been too quiet for too long. Celine's eyes glistened. She opened her mouth, likely to cry on cue. But no one moved to console her. Not this time. Cormac finally spoke, more to the room than to me. This could have consequences. I turned to him. For whom? The one who lies and excludes, or the one who finally stops accepting it? He had no answer. I faced Irene. My mother. My mother, who once told me I was her anchor, then watched while I was shoved off the boat. She didn't look away, but she didn't defend me either. I'm done keeping the peace, I said. Not if it means swallowing poison. I turned toward the door. That's when Selena broke. Her voice rose, sharp and cracking. You think this is over? I stopped. One hand on the doorknob. I turned back, steady as stone. No, but your version of it is. And with that, I stepped out into the evening air. The sky was darker now, but I didn't feel heavy. For once, the weight wasn't mine. And I had no intention of ever carrying theirs again. Some endings don't need an invitation. They just need a witness. I wasn't planning to go to the dinner. Not at first. But after I sent the message to the family group thread with everything, every receipt, every buried truth I'd quietly collected, something in me shifted. The thread lit up within 30 minutes. Reactions poured in like nervous weather. A thumbs up from my aunt, a heart from my cousin. A shocked face from someone I didn't even know still had me on notifications. But what stood out the most was the silence. No one defended Celine, not even my mother. And that silence? It didn't hurt for once. It landed like a long-awaited breath, like someone had opened a window in a house that'd gone stale with secrets. Still, I got in the car. Still, I went, not for closure. Closure is a myth people chase when they want neat endings. This wasn't about healing or reconciling. This was about standing in the room, looking everyone in the eye, and letting them feel the weight of what had finally surfaced. I didn't want to hear secondhand stories or warped versions passed through wine-soaked whispers. I wanted to see it for myself, the unraveling. The table was set when I arrived, too carefully. Polished silverware, candles too tall for comfort. There were place cards this time. Mine actually had my name on it, no aliases, no extra guest. Just Laureline. I sat at the end of the table. Not tucked away, not front and center. Just solid, present. Celine wasn't there. Apparently, she'd been admitted to a hospital nearby earlier that morning, under observation, someone muttered. The word around the table was food poisoning, and of course, I saw the flickers of suspicion behind a few glances. As if the timing wasn't suspicious in itself. Veda sat beside me, her posture quiet and unshaken. She had aged a decade in the last week, but not from sadness, from clarity. There's something about watching your mother reclaim her place that redefines the word strength for a daughter. Midway through the main course, Cormac approached me with that politician's tilt to his jaw. His voice was soft, rehearsed. "Laureline," he said, "if this continues to escalate, no one wins." "Is that a threat?" I asked, without flinching. He gave a tight smile. "It's just the truth." I met his eyes, sharp and steady. Then let the truth do the talking. I returned to my seat. A few moments later, the room shifted. Dr. Ansel Grove entered through the side door uninvited, but clearly expected by someone. A hush fell over the table. Even the knives stopped scraping. He wasted no time. "Ms. Calloway experienced an adverse reaction to a stimulant compound," he said flatly. "It's something often found in over-the-counter weight loss supplements. It was worsened by alcohol and heightened stress. I want to be clear. It was not food-related." He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. A few people exhaled. Others glanced at one another. The narrative shifted. Celine's absence, once ominous, now looked more like a calculated retreat than a medical emergency. A curtain pulled back just enough to show the strings. Under the table, Veda's hand found mine. I didn't look down, but I squeezed it once. That was enough. As plates were cleared and a thin fruit tart arrived for dessert, a woman I barely recognized floated over to me. One of Celine's friends, perfectly toned, glass of red wine in hand, and a smile stretched too wide to be sincere. "You handled that really well," she said. "Honestly, after everything with the divorce, I wasn't sure you'd bounce back." I looked at her, held her gaze just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Good thing," I replied softly. "I wasn't bouncing for anyone but myself." She blinked, confused, and gave a polite laugh, like it told a joke she didn't quite understand. Then came the final toast. "There's always one." I stood, lifting my glass not high, just enough. My voice didn't tremble. "To Celine," I said evenly. "May we all heal, honestly." The silence after was brief. A few clinks, a few nods. No applause. Then I walked forward and placed a small stack on the table. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. A copy of the evening's menu, my name handwritten in by my own hand. A printout of the family photo collage, the one that made the rounds last Christmas, with a red circle around the only blurry, cut-off photo of me. Everyone else had 10 shots. I had a shoulder. And one final page. A quote from a letter my mother had written, but never sent. "Sometimes I think you don't need me. But maybe I've been wrong." I didn't look up. I didn't explain the quote, or where I found it. I turned to leave. As I reached the doorway, someone behind me, maybe a cousin, maybe one of the cousins' partner, called out, "Where are you going?" I paused, hand on the doorframe. My voice was calm. "Home," I said. Finally. And I meant it. But leaving the table didn't mean I left the hunger behind. I walked into the night air after that dinner and let the door close behind me, not looking back. The restaurant's lights dimmed behind glass like a distant stage gone dark. For once, I wasn't trembling. I wasn't wondering how they'd spin it. I wasn't even rehearsing comebacks in my head. It was done. And I was done. A week passed. Quietly. Celine didn't call. Neither did Cormac. The group chat that once buzzed with birthday plans and passive-aggressive updates about holiday logistics had gone silent. Not even an emoji. Then Irene called. Not to ask how I was. Not to revisit the letter or acknowledge the documents I'd laid bare in front of the family. She asked if I was coming to brunch. "They miss you," she said, like I was a casserole dish gone missing from the buffet line. I told her gently, "I think I'll sit this one out, maybe for good." She didn't argue. Just paused, then said, "Well, the chair will be there if you change your mind." That Sunday, they gathered without me. I didn't ask, but Veda peeked at a cousin's Instagram story. One photo showed the long brunch table. 12 seats filled. One chair left empty, a coffee cup untouched in front of it. For her, someone had written in the caption. Irene had apparently said I was just going through a phase. She's always been difficult, she'd added, always needing to feel seen. No one noticed it was the same chair that used to have Celine's gold nameplate, the same one I was never invited to sit in. Days later, Celine posted a throwback on social media, an old photo from a Christmas party a decade ago. She captioned it, "Remember when I saved Christmas dinner with that last-minute dessert?" I stared at the screen. That dessert was mine. I had made it from scratch when the store bought one she'd promised to bring thawed into mush in the trunk of her car. No one thanked me that night, just compliments for Celine for thinking ahead. Even now, the truth was a photo edited after the moment had passed. I didn't comment, didn't correct her. I just shut my phone off and took a walk with Veda along the trail by the bay. She kicked pebbles with the toes of her sneakers while I breathed in the salt and wind. "You okay?" she asked after a while. I looked down at her. "Being remembered isn't the same as being known," I said. "You deserve both." She didn't reply. Just reached for my hand and held it without squeezing. That evening, Celine received notice of an internal ethics review at her PR firm. I wasn't told directly, but word got around. Someone had submitted clips and edited footage, screenshots, witness statements. There were no lawsuits, no public takedown, but there were whispers, meetings she was left out of, invitations that stopped arriving, distance, soft and slow. She'd always valued image. It was strange to watch her become invisible on her own stage. At a writing group session I joined at the library, the topic of the week was unsent truths. Everyone brought letters they never mailed. I brought Minimi Mothers, the one that had gathered dust in the drawer for over a decade. I didn't read it aloud. I just held it while others shared theirs. Afterward, I tucked it back into my bag and made a copy. Some wounds don't close with time. They close when we stop hoping they never opened. Sometimes, the deepest healing doesn't come from being right. It comes from finally being heard. I spent years staying quiet, thinking silence made me strong. But silence doesn't protect you, it erases you. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Speak your truth before someone else rewrites it for you. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, I hope this story reminds you that your voice matters, that your name matters, and most of all, that you don't have to earn your place at a table built with your hands. Let me ask you, have you ever been treated like a background character in your own story? If so, how did you reclaim your voice? Share with me in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this video touched your heart, leave it in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't, let me know why. I welcome every honest opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more true stories that go beyond the surface. Your support helps these voices be heard. Hi, I'm Donna. My sister used to laugh and say, "Don't embarrass yourself," just because I dared to step onto a shooting range. They all watched, waiting for me to fail, cheering when I stumbled. But what hurt most wasn't the jokes, it was years of silent betrayal. Years of being the family's hidden shame. And when I finally fired my first shot, everything changed. But how deep did their betrayal really go? And what price did they pay when I refused to stay small? The restaurant was already buzzing when I pulled into the parking lot. Valerie's birthday. Of course, our parents had gone all out private room, white tablecloths, crystal glasses gleaming under soft lights. Typical. Everything Valerie touched had to scream perfect, even if it hid the rot underneath. I walked in, my heels clicking too loudly on the polished floor. Heads turned briefly polite smiles, quick glances, then back to ignoring me. I caught my mother's tight look, my father's half-hearted nod. They showed up, but that was all. Valerie was already holding court, laughing too loudly, flipping her blonde hair. When she saw me, her smirk widened, that familiar look that always meant trouble. Dinner dragged on, a haze of overcooked steak and hollow conversation about promotions, renovations, kids in overpriced schools. I didn't belong. I never had. Then came the toast. Valerie stood, tapping her glass. "A toast to family courage," she said sweetly, her eyes locking onto mine. I froze, feeling the trap spring before she even finished. "To my dear sister Donna," she continued, voice dripping with false affection. "Who's bravely trying a shooting competition?" She laughed, sharp and brittle. "Let's just hope she doesn't shoot herself." Laughter exploded around the table, some genuine, some forced. Dad pressed his lips together to hide a grin. Mom studied her napkin like it held the secrets of the universe. Heat flushed my face, but I stayed still, clenched fists under the table, nails digging into palms. Not here. Not tonight. Valerie wasn't finished. "It's inspiring," she added mockingly, "to see Donna chase dreams, even if they're a bit out of her depth." The words cut deeper than any knife. No one defended me. Not one damn person. I lifted my glass slowly, took a sip. It tasted like ash. The rest of the night blurred fake smiles, mechanical nods, polite nothingness, survival mode, a routine I'd perfected. When I finally escaped into the cold night air, it felt like I could breathe again. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. On the passenger seat lay the flyer. Boise Open Range Competition, March 30th. Open to all skill levels. Creased. Handled too many times. I stared at it, Valerie's smirk still fresh in my mind. The way they all looked right through me, like I was already a ghost. Maybe this time, I'd let my actions speak louder than their laughter. The days blurred into restless nights and second-guessing. But by week's end, I made a decision. I circled the competition date on my calendar, no more hiding, no more playing small. When April arrived, a sharp morning breeze cut through the Boise Sports Club parking lot. I tightened my jacket and stared at the sleek glass entrance. Inside, serious competitors moved with the calm precision of ex-military, retired law enforcement, seasoned sharpshooters, and me, a former accountant with a second-hand Glock and something to prove. I pushed open the door and approached the registration table. A woman handed me a clipboard without much fuss. I filled it out, my hands finally steady. While writing my name, a high-pitched laugh sliced through the room. I didn't need to look up. Well, look who made it out of Walmart!" Valerie's voice rang out like a shot. I froze, pen midair. She strutted into view, decked out in tactical gear that probably cost more than my car. Her entourage followed, grinning, whispering, forming a wall like they owned the place. "You here to watch the big kids play, Donna?" Valerie smirked. "Hope you remembered which end of the gun points forward." Snickers rippled through the lobby. Some glanced at me, pity, amusement, indifference. Heat crawled up my neck, but I stayed still. I finished signing my name slowly, deliberately. "Don't worry, everyone," Valerie added, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "My little sister's a real natural. If natural means hitting the ceiling instead of the target." More laughter. Someone muttered, "Poor thing." I could have walked out. It would have been easier. But instead, I breathed deep inhale control, exhale doubt, just like Caleb taught me. Without a word, I handed my form to the clerk and accepted my competition number. Then, just once, I met Valerie's gaze. No smile, no fear, just a look that said, "You don't know who you're dealing with anymore." Valerie's smirk faltered, only for a second, before she laughed too loudly and turned away. I slipped the laminated number into my jacket pocket and walked toward the shooting lanes. Each step felt heavier and somehow steadier, too. I wasn't there to prove anything to them. Only to myself. I made my way to the waiting area, weaving past clusters of competitors warming up or chatting in tight circles. The air buzzed with a mix of competition nerves and casual camaraderie, except where I sat. Alone. I found a chair near the edge of the room, tucked between a vending machine and a battered notice board covered in old event flyers. I slid into the seat, gripping my competition number tighter than necessary, the laminated edge digging into my palm. Around me, fathers clapped sons on the shoulder, friends compared gear, spouses gave last-minute pep talks. No one came over to me. No one even glanced my way. A laugh caught in my throat before I could stop it, bitter, small, helpless. How fitting. Even now, even here, I was still the outsider looking in. A familiar ache stirred under the surface, dredging up a memory I hadn't invited. I was 12 again, sitting alone at the edge of the bleachers during our middle school talent show. Rachel had promised she'd save me a seat, best friends forever, she'd said. Pinky swear. But when I got there, the seats beside her were already filled. Valerie had beckoned Rachel up into her shiny new circle, the cool girls with matching glitter sneakers and whispered secrets, and Rachel had gone without a backward glance. I remembered standing there, hugging my science fair poster against my chest, pretending I didn't care, pretending I wasn't dying inside. Rachel had smiled at me once, small and guilty, then turned away, laughing louder at whatever Valerie had said. It wasn't some big betrayal. It wasn't screaming or slamming doors. It was worse, slow, silent abandonment. A quiet decision that I wasn't worth holding on to. That was the day I stopped believing in promises, and sitting here now, 15 years later, surrounded by teams and tribes I didn't belong to, the sting felt just as fresh. Different stage. Same emptiness. I shifted in my chair, brushing invisible dust from my jeans, refusing to let the memory rot me from the inside out. Not today. Because today wasn't about being picked. It wasn't about being wanted. It was about showing up. For me. The loudspeaker crackled overhead, yanking me out of the past. Competitor 47, please report to lane 12. I rose to my feet, not because I was ready, but because I refused to stay invisible any longer. As I made my way towards lane 12, I passed by the bleachers set up along the side of the range. A part of me, foolish and stubborn, scanned the rows for a familiar face. Maybe, just maybe, someone had come. Maybe Mom or Dad had changed their minds. Maybe, deep down, they were proud of me stepping out of the shadows. Hope is a funny thing. It sticks around long after it should have died. The stands were dotted with clusters of spectators' parents snapping photos, friends clapping backs, husbands and wives sharing whispered encouragement. Everyone seemed to have someone. Everyone, except me. And there, right near the front, Valerie sat draped across a metal bench like she owned it. Her group of friends flanked her like a royal court. She threw her head back, laughing at something one of them said. Right beside her, my parents sat stiffly, looking straight ahead, pretending not to see me. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They didn't even nod. Nothing. Their silence was a roaring void. A message clearer than any shouted insult. You're not one of us. It was a punch to the gut in slow motion. One I should have seen coming, but stupidly, I'd hoped anyway. For a moment, my hands shook not from fear, but from the raw force of betrayal coursing through my veins. They hadn't just left me alone today. They'd been abandoning me for years. Tiny slights, small exclusions, choosing Valerie's spotlight over my quiet corner every single time. And I'd let them. Standing there in the middle of the concrete floor, with my competition number flapping against my jacket, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. I wasn't losing them. I never really had them. Whatever bond I thought we shared had been slowly snipped away, thread by invisible thread, until nothing was left but polite obligation and strained smiles. I could have cried. I could have walked out. I could have disappeared, just like they clearly preferred. Instead, I turned my back on the bleachers and kept walking. If I was going to stand alone, I might as well stand tall. At the shooting lane, I set my bag down, took out my Glock, and began to load the magazine with steady, measured hands. No shaking, no second guessing. The speaker crackled overhead, announcing the start of the warm-up session. I adjusted my stance, locked my gaze downrange, and took my first deep breath of the afternoon. If they thought I'd crumble without their applause, they were about to be very disappointed. The scent of gun oil and cold metal filled the firing lane as I squared my shoulders and settled into my stance. My hands moved automatically, gripping, aligning, preparing, just like I had practiced 1,000 times in private. When I wrapped my fingers around the Glock, though, a sharp sense of wrongness prickled down my spine. The weight was off, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But not to me. The trigger felt sluggish under my finger, and the balance leaned awkwardly toward the muzzle. Something had been tampered with. I didn't need a detective to figure out who might have orchestrated it. Valerie's earlier laughter rang fresh in my mind, like the lingering sting of a slap. I rolled my shoulders back, forcing a calm I didn't feel. This wasn't just about a dirty trick anymore. This was a declaration. A move in a game she thought she could rig. Fine. Two could play. Slowly, deliberately, I adjusted my grip, rebalanced my posture, made micro-adjustments only someone who knew her weapon inside and out could manage under pressure. Around me, other competitors were firing off their warm-up round-squick bursts of sound and motion. I blocked it out, narrowing my world down to the steady rise and fall of my breath, the exact placement of my feet, the slight squeeze it would take to compensate for the heavier trigger pull. I aimed. I fired. The first shot struck lower than I'd expected, but still within the outer ring of the target. Not a miss. Not even close. A murmur ran through the competitors nearby, some of whom had been watching with half-interested glances, waiting for me to flail and fail. Instead, I simply realigned and fired again. This shot landed closer to center, and the next closer still. By the fifth round, I found a new rhythm, not the one I'd trained for, but one that adapted to the sabotage I hadn't planned for. When the practice session was called to a pause, I slid my weapon back into its holster with slow, deliberate movements. I turned, walking past the tables where competitors and families mingled, where Valerie lounged like a queen presiding over her court. I could have ignored her, kept walking, stayed small, but no. I let my steps slow just slightly as I passed, just enough. Valerie looked up from her phone, caught my eye, and for one glorious heartbeat, her perfectly rehearsed smile faltered. I offered her a razor-thin smile. No teeth, no warmth, just a quiet promise. You don't get to break me. She blinked, recovering a little too quickly, plastering on a smirk for her friends. But the crack had appeared, and once a crack formed, it only grew. I moved on, heart hammering in my chest, not with fear, but with something far more potent. Resolve. She wanted a war? Fine, but she wouldn't like how I fought it. The moment my feet cleared Valerie's circle, I tightened the strap of my shooting gloves, mentally clicking into a different gear. It was no longer about proving anything. It was about reclaiming what they thought they could steal my control. At my lane, I flexed my fingers once, twice. The weight of the Glock was still off, but I'd already adapted. Instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. I breathed deep, steadying the chaos inside me. Adapt, overcome, win. Caleb's voice, calm and sure, echoed in my memory. He had drilled those words into me in another lifetime, back when the world felt safer, or at least more honest. The first round bell rang, crisp and merciless. I set my sights down range, exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The shot landed tight, not perfect, but close enough. I recalibrated without hesitation, shifting my weight slightly on the balls of my feet, letting the rhythm of recoil and readjustment flow through me. Second shot cleaner, third sharper, fourth almost dead center. The scores flickered briefly on the overhead screen. I caught a glimpse of murmurs rippling through the crowd, subtle shifts of posture, sidelong glances. Some curious, some grudgingly impressed. I blocked it out. This wasn't about them. This was about standing in my own skin, unashamed, untouchable. The announcer's voice crackled through the PA system, listing rankings so far. My name rose higher than I'd dared to hope. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Valerie staring, not laughing now, but tight-lipped and narrowed-eyed, like she'd just bitten into something rotten. Good. Let her taste defeat before it even arrived. Reloading, I made no effort to hide the confidence sharpening my movements. Every click, every chambered round spoke for me. You tried to bury me, but you forgot I'm the seed. I lifted my eyes across the range, letting them find hers. No smugness, no theatrics, just pure, quiet defiance. Her friends nudged her, whispering something I couldn't hear, but Valerie didn't take her gaze off me. For the first time, she looked uncertain. I finished loading, set my jaw, took my place. The final qualifying round loomed harder, faster, less forgiving. I could feel the energy shifting, a different kind of storm gathering. If she thought she'd shaken me before, she was about to learn just how dangerous a woman could become when she had nothing left to lose and nothing left to prove. The air inside the lounge buzzed differently now, a low, uncomfortable murmur weaving through the crowd like static. I peeled off my gloves and headed toward the water station, trying to stay loose for the next round. But the tension clung to me like humidity before a storm. Every step, every glance from strangers felt heavier. A couple huddled near the snack table shot me a sideways look, whispering behind cupped hands. She couldn't have pulled that off. Not without some trick, I caught a woman's voice hiss, brittle with suspicion. Another man chuckled under his breath. Maybe it's her lucky day. Or maybe, just maybe, it was called hard work, something people like Valerie and her entourage wouldn't recognize if it slapped them across the face. I kept moving, pretended not to notice, pretended it didn't land. It did. The hallway toward the admin offices glowed with fluorescent light, too harsh, too sterile. That's when I saw Valerie standing smugly at the counter, filing paperwork. Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the receptionist and anyone else nearby to hear. "Just concerned about fairness," she said sweetly, handing over a form. I mean, it's not every day someone jumps from novice to top tier in one afternoon. Concerned about fairness, from Valerie. That almost made me laugh out loud. Before I could turn away, an official clipboard clutched against his chest like a shield approached me. "Miss Weaver, could we have a word?" "Of course." They led me to a back room lined with dusty trophies and worn leather chairs. Professional smiles barely masked their discomfort. "We've received a concern," one began. "Just a procedural check. Nothing formal yet." Yet. I kept my expression neutral as they asked about my performance, how long I'd been training, whether I had outside coaching. I answered calmly, giving them what they wanted. Timelines, training details, everything down to the type of drills Caleb had taught me years ago. I even pulled out my worn old training logbook from my duffel, the one Caleb insisted I keep back when I thought shooting was just a hobby. Dates, scores, notes, hard evidence. The man flipped through it, his brow furrowing, then relaxing slightly. "This all looks in order," he said after a pause. Of course it did. Valerie could throw all the mud she wanted, it wouldn't stick. When they finally dismissed me, I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket with steady hands. As I exited into the main hall, Valerie was waiting, pretending to check her phone, pretending not to care. I walked right past her, slow and steady, locking eyes for just a beat longer than necessary. No smile this time, no words. Just a message, clear and sharp as a bullet. You came for me. Now I'm coming for you. The sunset poured gold across the concrete as the final call came through the loudspeakers. "Final round, competitors, to your lanes." I slipped my gloves back on, my movements slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of every step as I made my way back to lane 12. The energy around me had shifted, not just suspicion anymore, but something sharper. Anticipation. This was it. No second chances, no excuses. Just me, the target, and every scar that had led me here. I took my stance, grounding myself. Deep breath, release. The world narrowed to the line of my sight, the steady grip in my palms, the beat of my own heart syncing with the final countdown. 3 shots in, bullseye. 6 shots, still center mass. 12, 15, 20. Each round hit home with a crisp, satisfying crack. The crowd grew quieter with every hit, until the air was thick with a kind of stunned reverence. Even the officials edged closer to the scoring screens, eyebrows climbing higher after every confirmation. The last shot. I paused, lowering the muzzle slightly to reset my breath, feeling every muscle and memory and buried battle snap into place inside me like puzzle pieces. I raised the Glock, squeezed. Dead center. The hall stayed silent for a long, suspended moment before the applause broke out sharp and genuine, not the forced politeness I had known all my life. I set the gun down carefully, blinking hard against the sudden burn behind my eyes. Not from sadness, not even from relief, from something deeper, vindication. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, Valerie standing frozen at the edge of the crowd, her mouth slightly open, as if she'd forgotten how to close it. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I didn't look back as I walked toward the judges' table. Senator Hollis, in his crisp navy suit and campaign pin, leaned into the microphone, his voice booming clear across the club. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to announce with a new club record score, Miss Donna Shipman, first place." The room erupted. I barely heard it. The sound felt distant, like ocean waves in my ears. My knees wobbled for a second, but I stayed upright, refusing to stumble now. As the crowd surged around me, I scanned the faces, strangers mostly, a few polite acquaintances, some surprised smiles, but no Valerie. She was gone. Not even a goodbye. And somehow that small absence hit harder than the applause. Victory wasn't supposed to feel lonely, but I was about to learn endings weren't always celebrations. The ride home was a blur of headlights and muted streetlights. I didn't bother turning on the radio. The silence felt earned. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, night had fully settled over Boise. The air smelled faintly of rain and pavement, sharp, clean, like a world washed new. I stepped inside, dropping my keys onto the counter with a hollow clink. My jacket followed, tossed over the back of the nearest chair. In my other hand, the medal and certificate dangled limply, still warm from my grip. Without ceremony, I placed them on the kitchen counter. Not in a frame, not on a shelf. Just there. Proof, for no one but myself. The apartment felt smaller tonight. Or maybe I just felt bigger inside it. I made my way to the worn couch, sinking down into the cushions. The hum of the city filtered through the windows, distant sirens, the occasional bark of a dog. Life going on, indifferent to victories or failures. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I almost ignored it. Almost. But habit won out. I reached for it, thumb swiping across the screen. Valerie. Of course. A flood of texts, one after another, angry and bitter. "You think you're better than us now? Don't forget where you came from. You humiliated the family. Enjoy it while it lasts, princess." Each message more acidic than the last, dripping resentment and warped pride. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a tired, deep certainty. This was who she'd always been. I had just stopped pretending otherwise. Without replying, I pressed down on the thread. Delete conversation? I tapped yes. A second prompt. Are you sure? Another tap. Gone. One by one, I deleted the others too, the old voicemails, the saved pictures, the emails I'd told myself I'd reread someday to find clues. All of it. Erased. Not out of spite, not out of hate, out of mercy for myself. I set the phone down gently, then stood and wandered over to the window. The city sprawled out beneath me, lights blinking steady and stubborn against the night. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, letting the quiet settle around me like a second skin. The wounds weren't healed. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But for the first time in years, they felt like scars, not open cuts. I wasn't waiting for anyone's applause anymore. I wasn't chasing anyone's love. I was just here, whole enough, free enough. Not all victories come with parades. Some just come with silence and freedom. As I stand here now, looking back over everything, I realize something I wish I'd understood years ago. You don't need anyone else's permission to be enough. You don't need their applause to be worthy. The people who choose to walk away, let them. The people who try to tear you down, let them try. What matters is that you keep standing. Keep showing up for yourself even when the seats around you are empty, even when the voices try to drown you out. Because strength isn't something anyone can hand you. It's something you build, one hard day at a time, one silent victory after another. And if my story can remind you of anything, let it be this. Your value was never up for debate. Not then, not now, not ever. I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand alone? How did it shape you? Share your story in the comments. Let's build a space where resilience is celebrated. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, leave a comment with a 1, or let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you didn't connect with it, tell me why your voice matters here. And hey, if you'd like to hear more real, raw stories about strength, growth, and finding your voice, don't forget to subscribe and join this community. There's a lot more to come, and I can't wait to walk this journey with you. Hi, my name's Avira, and I was told to kneel at my sister's wedding because I broke a glass. But it wasn't about the glass. It was never about the glass. It was about years of being invisible, about sending money to help mom while they spent it on designer gowns, about planning a wedding I wasn't invited to speak at, and when I finally walked away, quietly, without a scene, the entire thing collapsed. But here's the thing. Was it really a collapse? Or had it been rotting long before the violin ever played? Would you stay if your own family treated you like background noise at your sister's big day? Would you kneel, or would you walk out too? I didn't even feel the glass slip. 1 second I was adjusting a napkin that wouldn't lie flat, and the next, crystal splintered against stone, shattering into 1,000 quiet accusations. It echoed louder than it should have. Everything froze. The clinking of forks, the soft hum of conversation, the pianist rehearsing in the corner, all silenced. I stood there, fingers still curled around the napkin, as the room turned toward me. Aviera! Callista's voice cracked through the hush, sharp and practiced, like a stage actor trained to command silence. Her wedding gown shimmered beneath the garden lights, a curated vision of southern elegance. She looked perfect, until she opened her mouth again. Kneel and apologize right now, she hissed, or get out. Gasps fluttered through the guests. I could feel them judging, whispering, eyes flickering from her to me. I glanced toward our mother, seated just a few feet from the head table. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. She lowered her eyes and smoothed her dress like it had wrinkles to fix instead of a daughter to defend. I didn't move. I didn't kneel. My body locked up the way it always had when shame licked down my spine. Quiet, burning, but never enough to collapse me. For a brief moment, I thought someone might speak. Elijah, the wedding planner, our history aside, surely he wouldn't stand for this. But he looked away, too polished, too quiet, like everyone else. I bent slightly, only to gather the broken shards. A sharp edge nicked my palm, and I barely blinked. I folded the glass pieces into a linen napkin, careful, deliberate. Then I walked over to the closest side table, laid it down, and turned back toward the crowd. My chair was empty, of course. There had never been a place card for me. Earlier, I'd circled the guest board looking for my name. A server finally whispered, "I think you're in overflow, miss." I'd smiled then, told myself it didn't matter, but it did. I slipped my purse strap over my shoulder and began walking down the aisle. Not the one lined with petals for Callista, but the narrow pathway behind the catering tent that led to the main gate. Heels on stone. My mother didn't follow. Callista didn't stop me. One of the guests whispered, "Did she just leave?" And still, no one moved. Let them watch. Let them remember how silence could stand taller than any scream. Flashbacks came uninvited, as they always do in moments like this. Me at 13, holding Callista's bouquet for her high school prom photo because she didn't trust anyone else to handle it right. Me at 20, wiring money home while she was on vacation in Cancun. Me at 27, organizing mom's medications during her recovery, while Callista live-streamed her makeup line launch, always just behind the camera, always holding things for someone else. As I stepped off the porch, the air hit different. Cooler, sharper. Savannah nights had that way about them, like they knew secrets and weren't afraid to whisper them straight into your skin. I walked the path slowly, careful not to trip. My heart beat steady. No drama, no shaking. Just done. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not here. not in a place that demanded kneeling as the price of staying. What haunted me most wasn't Callista's voice, it was the lack of anyone else's. No one had said my name. No one had asked if I was okay. They just watched, like a show. Like I'd been cast as the misstep in their perfect tableau. Halfway down the gravel drive, I heard footsteps. For a second, I thought, maybe someone came. Maybe someone cared enough to. But it was just a groomsman, scurrying back toward the reception, talking into a headset. Not for me. Never for me. I walked until the music faded into the wind, until the estate lights were nothing but a shimmer on the horizon. And still, no one called my name. They wouldn't have said it right anyway. I kept walking, past the hedges trimmed within an inch of their lives, past the stone cherub fountain where Callista once posed for her college graduation photos, and down the driveway lined with fairy lights. My car wasn't parked at the main lot. Of course not. Overflow guests didn't get valet service. I found it tucked behind a row of catering vans, dust-covered from the dirt road, and boxed in by folding chairs that someone had clearly forgotten to stack properly. I sat inside for a while, engine off, windows cracked. The late afternoon sun hung low, bleeding gold over the estate. Somewhere inside, the music had resumed. I could hear the cello, slow and sweeping, probably trying to patch the mood I'd ripped open. That glass. It wasn't just an accident. It was the last sound before the illusion broke. But the illusion had started unraveling long before the glass shattered. Weeks earlier, when Callista's invitation arrived, I'd been sitting at my kitchen table, peeling a boiled egg and sorting out rent receipts. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with gold lettering. Custom work, no doubt. I opened it, half expecting to find some over-the-top calligraphy scrawling my name with her usual flair. Instead, it read, "To Avira Thomas, guest. Guest. Not Avira Thames. Not sister of the bride. Just a name that didn't belong to me, paired with a title that said everything about how little I mattered. I remember texting her gently, because you learn to ask Callista questions gently. I sent a photo of the card, added a laughing emoji to soften it. She replied 2 hours later, "Silly printer error. You know I'd never get your name wrong." It wasn't the first time, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Callista had perfected the art of making you feel unimportant while smiling through it. A missing name here, a forgotten birthday there, little things that stacked up quietly, like dust in corners no one bothers to clean. Still, I helped. I always did. When she asked me to come a day early to help with the rehearsal dinner, I said yes. When she asked if I could just swing by the florist to confirm the delivery, I said yes. When she asked if I'd mind helping her fiancé's mother write her toast, because you're such a good writer, I said yes. Helping had become my second skin. That morning, the seating chart had been posted outside the tent, a giant gold frame propped on an easel. Guests crowded around, pointing, laughing, sipping their pre-ceremony champagne. I scanned the names once, twice. Nothing. I pulled aside a teenage server, whispering, "Hey, can you help me find Avira Thames?" She glanced over, confused, then shrugged. "Oh, I think you're in overflow. Probably the back garden seats. No table assignment." I smiled then. I always smiled. "Of course. Thank you." That afternoon, while helping Callista with her makeup prep, she asked if I was still planning to say a few words during the toasts. "Just something short," she said, brushing blush across her cheekbone. "You've always known how to make people cry in the good way." I'd prepared a short speech, light, sincere, about growing up in a house with a sister who could charm the wind, and how proud I was to see her build this life. I'd planned to close with a line about grace and forgiveness, something she always wanted to believe she embodied. But when the final printed program was handed to guests just an hour before the ceremony, my name wasn't listed anywhere. Not under speakers, not under family, not even under special thanks. I found her near the mirror wall, pinning her veil. "Hey, quick question," I said, my voice casual. Did the speech slot get cut? She didn't even look up. Things changed. We needed to make space. It's not personal. Not personal. That's what people say when they want to stab you and not be blamed for the bleeding. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I nodded, turned away, and told myself it was just another oversight. But as I sat outside that evening, back against a bench near the estate's fountain, it all felt intentional. The misspelled name, the missing chair, the speech she promised and took away. I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased, like a typo someone kept forgetting to fix because the story looked better without me in it. A bridesmaid wandered by then, wine glass in hand. She was the kind that always smiled like a magazine cover, wide, polished, too much teeth. "Hey," she said. "Sorry about what happened in there. Honestly, Callista just didn't want too many people speaking. She redid all the speeches herself. Wanted to keep the tone upbeat, you know?" "Upbeat," I repeated, flat. "Yeah. She said yours might be a little heavy?" Her voice rose at the end like a question she didn't want answered. I nodded, eyes fixed on the water. The fountain gurgled like it was laughing at me. "Anyway," she continued, backing away, "you still look amazing. That dress is killer." She left before I could reply. I sat a while longer, until the air shifted and dusk rolled in. Somewhere behind the walls of that estate, they were serving dinner, toasting a future built on curated memories, laughing over rewritten history. I didn't just feel forgotten, I felt erased. The next evening, long before the glass and the spotlight and that command to kneel, I'd sat at the edge of a long banquet table during the rehearsal dinner, sandwiched between two floral arrangements so tall I could barely see the person across from me. Maybe that was the point, the kind of visual metaphor no one admits, but everyone understands. The dining hall of the estate was glowing, candlelight flickering against polished silver, laughter bouncing off vaulted ceilings. The center of the room belonged to Callista, of course. Her laughter rang a little louder. Her hair had been redone mid-dinner, because the first updo wasn't giving ceremony ready. People orbited around her like she was the sun. And I was the place card they almost forgot to print. Dinner plates were cleared, and dessert, some kind of delicate panna cotta in crystal cups, had just been served when the projector was wheeled in. A server dimmed the lights, and the screen lit up with the title, The Journey of Us. I recognized the font. I had shown her that typeface when we were teenagers, flipping through bridal magazines, dreaming of a wedding that would never be mine. Slide after slide glided across the screen. There was Callista helping Mom fold laundry. Callista holding me as a toddler in a frame labeled Protector from the Start. Callista winning the county fair speech contest. Callista in her college cap and gown. At one point, I appeared. In a group photo from elementary school, blurred in the background. Not a single image of me solo. Not one from when I worked 3 jobs in high school, so she could quit band camp and focus on her pageant. Nothing from when I paid the electric bill the year Dad died and Mom forgot. No mention of the countless nights I stayed up editing Callista's business proposals while she drank wine and claimed collaboration. It was a history book rewritten by the winner. Every time someone at the table laughed or clapped at a sweet memory, my stomach pulled tighter. I wanted to stand up and say, "That story, I lived it too, just from behind the curtain," but I didn't. Because what would that sound like? Bitterness in the middle of whipped cream and candlelight. Toward the end, a family friend, Mr. Merriman, an old neighbor with a belly like a barrel and a voice that carried, stood up to toast. He lifted his glass and said, "Callista has always carried this family. Even when she was young, she had the shoulders for it." The applause that followed echoed longer than it should have. No one noticed me push my chair back. No one asked where I was going. I didn't even go far. I just stepped outside to breathe air that didn't reek of revisionist fiction. The porch was cooler, quieter. I leaned against the railing and stared at the garden lights, blinking like lazy stars across the lawn. My hands were cold. I didn't even bring a jacket. I had been too busy helping Callista steam hers. The door creaked softly behind me. For a second, I braced for her voice. Maybe some sweet, backhanded apology. But it wasn't Callista. It was Letty, my grandmother. She stepped beside me slowly. Her steps had grown uncertain this past year, but her gaze hadn't lost an inch of sharpness. "Quite a story in there," she said, eyes fixed on the same blinking lights, though it felt more like a fairy tale than a memory. I didn't answer. After a pause, she added, "Funny how memory works in this family. It always favors the loud." Still, I said nothing. Words were coiled too tight in my chest to come out straight. "I remember you," she said finally. "When your mom got sick and Callista couldn't deal with the hospital smell, you were the one who kept the schedule, drove her, sat through the scans, no camera, no audience, just you and your planner and that old blue hoodie you wore every day." I swallowed hard, not out of weakness, but because truth sometimes scratches your throat on its way out. She patted my hand, her skin dry and warm. "They forget because it's easier. But you don't have to pretend you weren't there, just because they won't name you." I turned to look at her. "It doesn't matter, right? That's what we tell ourselves?" Letty's eyes met mine. "No, baby, it does. It matters because the story becomes real when enough people retell it wrong." The door opened again behind us, louder this time. Laughter spilled out, the kind that didn't make it to your bones. Letty didn't flinch. "You've always held everything up, Avira," she said quietly. "They just built their stories on your silence." I didn't cry. I didn't go back inside either. I stood with her a little longer, letting that night air wrap around me, not to warm me, but to remind me what it felt like to breathe without shrinking. By the time the sun began its slow descent behind the estate's hedges, painting everything in a gold-tinged hush, I had managed to fold 53 chairs. My arms ached, and my fingers smelled faintly of gardenia and lemon polish. We'd just finished wrapping up the final touches after the rehearsal dinner. Napkins collected, candles extinguished, dessert crumbs swept into silver trays. Most of the bridal party had scattered to their rooms or corners of the estate, where late-night laughter was already starting to brew. I was heading toward the storage shed with the last load when she caught me. Lauren, Callista's best friend since high school, the kind who always laughed louder than she needed to, and remembered all her petty victories like they were published memoirs. She was already tipsy, holding a glass of something white and expensive, teetering slightly in heels too high for gravel. "V!" she sang out, using a nickname I'd stopped answering to years ago. "Hey, wait up." I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because it wasn't worth the effort to keep walking. She leaned in close, alcohol and hairspray in her breath, and giggled like she'd just tripped over a secret. "Callie told me something funny," she said, voice lowered as if the wind might gossip. "She said this whole wedding? It was her way of reminding you where you stood." My hands tightened around the folding chair I held. "She said you needed a little perspective, you know? Since you've always been kinda not great at staying in your lane." She winked. "Guess this was her chance to teach you something." I didn't say a word. I just nodded, turned back toward the shed, and kept walking. But inside, something dropped. The kind of drop you feel in your stomach when the mask falls off someone you thought you knew, even when you already knew better. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't overlooked me. She had planned this. That knowledge landed heavier than the chair in my hands. It hit even harder a few hours later, as I stood by the floral arch Callista would walk under the next day. The florists had gone, and the string lights were dimmed. I was there to check for wind damage. Per her request. Always one more task for the person least seen. And that's when I saw him. Elijah. He was adjusting a cluster of orchids on the left pillar, his back half turned. When he noticed me, he stiffened slightly, then slowly straightened. His mouth opened, then closed again. We stood in silence. The last time I saw him, he'd been holding a box of books and saying he needed space. 2 weeks later, he showed up on Callista's Instagram feed, shirtless, suntanned, and already branded as someone special. "Hi," he said finally. I didn't respond. There was nothing left in that hello for me to meet. He cleared his throat. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." "You mean here, under a structure I helped design?" I asked calmly. He winced. "I didn't know you were involved." "Of course you didn't. That's how it always goes with you." He glanced away. "This isn't what it looks like." I smiled. "No, Elijah, it's exactly what it looks like." I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped past him, adjusted the draping on the arch, and walked away. The heat in my chest wasn't rage, it was memory turning sharp, finally waking up. Later that night, I found Callista alone in the prep tent, brushing through the final outfit lineup with 2 stylists. When they left, I didn't give her time to breathe before I asked it. "Is there anything you haven't tried to take from me?" She turned slowly, one brow slightly lifted. "Oh, come on. Are we really doing this now?" "I need an answer." She laughed once, dry. "You gave it all up the moment you stayed quiet, Avira. For years. You practically handed me the script." I stared at her, letting the truth of it settle. She wasn't ashamed. She was triumphant. "That's your version?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "It's the only one that worked." Her words were like a door slamming shut. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I left the tent, walked down the sloping path past the gazebo, and into the far corner of the estate where no one else would find me. And there, with the rustling oaks whispering over my head, I let myself feel it. Finally. The way everything she'd done now made sense. The misprinted name, the speech she canceled, the missing photos. Elijah. It wasn't sloppiness. It wasn't circumstance. It was architecture. She had built a moment to stand above me and ensured I'd be on my knees, or not at all. But I hadn't kneeled. And I wouldn't start now. I woke to the sound of soft knocking. Not urgent, not rushed. Just a steady rhythm against the guest room door. I sat up slowly. The thin blanket on my bed had tangled around my legs, and the light filtering through the half-closed blinds told me it was still early. Too early for ceremony chaos, but just late enough for tension to be brewing. "Room service," came the muffled voice. I pulled on my robe and opened the door. A young server stood holding a tray with a single cup of coffee, a folded napkin, and a post-it note stuck under the saucer. "The bride said to offer this to you before rehearsal starts," he mumbled, eyes darting between me and the floor. "Also, they're asking if you've seen the florist. The payment's short." I blinked. "What?" "The delivery team said they need the remaining balance before setup. They're waiting at the gate." I took the tray and thanked him, closing the door slowly. The room was quiet again, but the calm didn't reach me. The note under the cup was scrawled in Callista's handwriting. "Smile today. It's almost over." I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the steam from the coffee rise, willing it to anchor me. But something itched. The payment was short. That didn't track. I'd been told, repeatedly, that everything was prepaid, handled, perfect. The kind of perfection Callista controlled like a military strategist. I reached for my phone, found Mom's number, and hit dial. She picked up on the third ring. "Morning, honey." "Morning," I replied. "Quick thing, didn't you say the florist deposit was covered?" A pause. "Well," she started slowly, "there was a bit of a mix-up. Callista needed to redirect some funds last week. She used some of yours, just temporarily." "Mine?" My voice stayed calm, but something cold settled into my stomach. "The account you set up for me, the one for medical costs and groceries. She needed help with vendor deposits, and you weren't touching that money for anything urgent." "You mean the money I've been sending for 2 years, I said, "to keep your lights on and your fridge full while I worked overtime." Silence. "She's your sister, Aviera," she said finally, voice tight with justification. "She's getting married. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing." I stared at the wall across from me. The paint was peeling near the window, probably from humidity. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Somewhere outside, I could hear distant laughter from the patio. "You didn't think I deserved to be asked?" I said, keeping my tone even. "I thought you'd understand," she snapped. "You always have." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I sat for a long while after that, letting the betrayal crystallize into clarity. They hadn't just taken money. They'd taken something far more precious, my willingness to keep giving. I dressed deliberately that morning. Navy blue suit, low heels, pearl studs. The kind of outfit people associate with composure, not confrontation. I put on lipstick in front of the mirror, watching my face transform into something I could carry through a war zone. Then I walked downstairs. The estate buzzed with movement, caterers unloading trays, the string quartet rehearsing in the garden, guests sipping early champagne under parasols. I moved through it all like a ghost in daylight, unnoticed by most. Callista stood by the center fountain, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her gown was hanging behind her in a garment bag, steaming slightly in the sun. She was laughing, always laughing, like nothing in this world had teeth. I passed close enough for her to see me, but not so close that she could stop me. She turned mid-laugh, just as I walked by. "You might control the day, Callie," I said quietly, "but not the cost." She blinked, then smiled, tight and practiced. "Don't start drama, Aviera. You're too old for tantrums." I didn't stop walking. I found a corner near the back garden, far from the curated perfection, and stood under a sycamore tree. My fingers trembled only once, before I opened the notes app on my phone and typed a single line. A name left off the list doesn't mean I don't exist. I saved it. I didn't need anyone else to read it. Letty found me there a few minutes later. She didn't say much, just stood beside me, both of us looking out over the lawn, where rows of white chairs gleamed like teeth. "You all right?" she asked eventually. "No," I said, "but I'm awake." She nodded. "They spent my love like it was spare change," I added softly, and wondered why I stopped offering more. She gave a faint smile, then looked out again. "People like that don't realize when they borrow too deep, until they're bankrupt." I stayed there with her until the orchestra started tuning. It was nearly time. By the time the ceremony guests began arriving, I had already checked every corner of the estate grounds twice. Not because anyone asked me to, of course. Habit, I guess. My name wasn't on any schedule or clipboard, but that never stopped me from showing up. I stayed to the side as people filtered in, women in long pastels with awkward fascinators, men trying to hide their discomfort in rented suits. I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. Cousins who hadn't returned calls, an old Sunday school teacher who used to tell me I was the quiet one. Everyone was here for the show, and Callista, as always, was the headliner. I found a quiet place behind the trellis arch to watch the final setup unfold. The cocktail bar stood under a cluster of oak trees, complete with custom signage that read, "Love on the Rocks," one of several clever names I'd brainstormed on a rainy afternoon months ago when Callista said she wanted Southern charm, but with an edge. She never mentioned it again after that. The floral arch was breathtaking. Lilies, eucalyptus, soft blush roses. The color palette? Mine. The layout of the aisle? I'd sketched it on graph paper when she couldn't decide how many rows would fit without crowding the center. And yet, I was the only one standing still. Everyone else buzzed with purpose and credit. The DJ clicked on the mic. "Before we begin, just a quick shout out to our amazing wedding planner, Elijah Monroe, for designing every beautiful detail you're seeing today." Applause rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, not clapping, not blinking. Callista turned toward the guests, her expression radiant. She knew what she was doing. Her gaze didn't reach me, but the corners of her mouth curled just enough to let me know. This was intentional. I felt my jaw tighten, my hand gripping the small program I'd been given at the entrance. Ironic, considering I was left off most of it. I rolled it into a neat cylinder, trying to focus on the fact that breathing was still free. After the toast, I made my way toward the back tent. Elijah was checking floral notes on a clipboard when he saw me approaching. He didn't smile. Just lowered the clipboard like someone caught in the wrong room. "I didn't expect them to mention me," he said quickly. "That was all Callista." "You didn't correct them." "I wasn't going to interrupt a toast, Avira." "You didn't correct them," I repeated, slower. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I know it's messed up, but this day's already balancing on edge. I didn't want to make things worse." "That's the problem," I said, voice steady. "Silence doesn't keep things from getting worse. It just hides the cut until it bleeds out." His face flinched, but I was already turning away. I didn't storm. I didn't cry. I walked. Back through the garden, through the rows of chairs, now half filled with anticipation. The string quartet had started playing softly, something classical and forgettable. I made my way toward the altar, slow, deliberate. Callista hadn't come out yet. She was likely still being fluffed and powdered and prepared for her moment of glory. I stepped up to the arch, the centerpiece of the entire ceremony. It tilted slightly from the breeze. A single rose had come loose, its stem slipping between the latticework. I reached up and fixed it. No fanfare, no speech, just the quiet act of claiming the work I'd done, of refusing to let someone else's name be etched over mine. I stepped back, smoothed my dress, and met the eyes of a few seated guests. Some recognized me, some didn't. That was fine. I wasn't there to be remembered. I was there to be undeniable. Then I caught Callista watching me from behind the French doors. She had seen the moment. Just a rose, just a gesture. But she saw it, and her smile faltered. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a seat at the table. She knew. I returned to the edge of the gathering, tucked behind a marble column, just wide enough to disappear behind. The ceremony was minutes from starting. Guests began taking their seats. Ushers whispered names and guided couples to rows. Photographers crouched near the aisle. I slipped away quietly. No one called after me. No one noticed. But the storm, as always, was already forming. I didn't even make it halfway to the refreshment table before a hand tugged lightly at my elbow. I turned, expecting one of the servers, or maybe a distant cousin, with questions about the seating. Instead, it was Brielle, the youngest of Callista's bridesmaids, barely old enough to rent a car, but already too aware of every social cue to ignore something messy. She didn't speak right away, just extended her phone with a tight-lipped frown, eyes darting toward the lawn where guests were beginning to take their seats. "What is this?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "They're passing it around in one of the bridal party group chats. I figured you should see it before it gets to the uncles." On her screen was a screenshot of a text message, supposedly from me. The name read Avira Thames, and the message beneath it was damning. "She stole my life. I'm not going to let her have this day without a price." It wasn't just petty. It was surgical, precise enough to sound unhinged, just enough to raise questions in a room full of whispers. My breath stayed even, but I felt the shift in my chest, the way your body knows it's under attack before your brain has caught up. I handed the phone back, nodded once. "Thank you for not assuming." Brielle swallowed, almost guilty. "I don't believe it, if that means anything." "It does." She moved away quickly, vanishing into the sea of chiffon and champagne. I stood rooted for a moment, then walked toward the inner courtyard, where the hydrangeas bloomed in clusters against the stone wall. I needed shade. I needed to think. Instead, I found my mother. She was seated on a bench, adjusting the clasp on her handbag like it had personally offended her. I approached slowly, giving her space. She didn't look up. I assume you've seen it, I said. I have. I waited. After a long pause, she finally asked, Did you send it? I looked at her fully now. You think I'd do that? She shrugged. You've always had a dramatic streak. A dramatic streak. That was what she called the years I stayed silent while holding this family together. When Callista bailed on Mom's hospital appointments, who sat there in the hard plastic chairs? When rent was late after Dad passed, who emptied her savings without asking for thanks? I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I said, my voice low. Not because I didn't notice. Mom pursed her lips. Well, it's Callista's day. I don't think you understand what that means to her. It seems like she's the only one whose feelings matter. You're making this about you again, she snapped, then stood up and walked away like she hadn't just carved something deep. I stared at the empty space she left behind and breathed through it. Elijah found me near the arbor, his hands shoved into his pockets like he was preparing for a confession he didn't quite believe in. I didn't know she'd go that far, he said. That message, I wouldn't have believed it came from you. I didn't bother with a reply. I could say something, he added. Tell people it's fake. I looked at him for a long time. You know what I need, Elijah? I need your silence to stop costing me. He looked away, jaw clenched. That was the end of our conversation. I didn't respond to the lies the way Callista expected. I didn't cry. I didn't grab a mic or demand a public correction. What I did instead was walk into the bridal suite where the final vendor files were kept and retrieved a folder I had brought days earlier, because some part of me had known this would come. Inside were copies of the original floral sketches, the invoice receipts in my name, screenshots of text threads where I'd pitched half the ceremony ideas that were now being called Elijah's vision. I found 5 people I knew well, our Aunt Marlene, Pastor Evans, 2 old family friends, and Mrs. Langston, who taught Callista and me in 3rd grade. I handed each of them a folder, said nothing more than, for when the truth starts feeling like fiction. I watched their faces as they read, flipped pages, paused. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Guests who'd been clapping too loud stopped mid-sentence. 1 or 2 people who'd already posted glowing Instagram stories took them down. It was subtle, not a rebellion, just a quiet shift. The kind of change that happens when enough people start thinking, maybe we didn't see everything. Letty appeared beside me as the crowd began murmuring. She didn't ask what I'd done. She didn't need to. She just squeezed my hand and whispered, They're scared of your truth. That's how you know it matters. And for the first time that day, I let myself feel it. Not anger, not pain, power. The violinist had just struck the first trembling note when I stood. I didn't hesitate. No glance over my shoulder, no dramatic pause for effect. Just the quiet scrape of my chair against stone and the slow, steady rhythm of my heels crossing the aisle. Straight down the center, past the startled rows of guests, through the symmetry and perfection that had excluded me from the start. Someone behind me whispered my name. Another muttered, Is she really? But I didn't stop to correct their speculation. I walked right through it. Because for the first time in that family's carefully curated history, I didn't owe anyone a performance. The gravel cracked beneath my feet as I stepped through the wrought iron gate at the end of the lawn. The estate stood behind me, like a portrait losing its frame. Meanwhile, inside, the script was cracking. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but I heard later how it unfolded. Jonathan had been standing near the altar, watching the crowd shift. He'd been quiet all morning, more observant than joyful. A guest, one of the people I'd handed the folder to earlier, tapped his shoulder, handed him the papers, and whispered, "You should read this before you say I do." Jonathan didn't respond. He didn't ask questions. He just read. 2 pages in, he turned to Elijah. "Did you know about this?" Elijah nodded once, tight-lipped, and that was it. No fight, no theatrics. Just a quiet man stepping up to a microphone moments before his bride was due to walk the aisle. The music stopped. Guests shifted, confused. Callista, in full veil and couture, had just emerged from the side hall. She caught sight of Jonathan, his expression unreadable, just as he said, voice calm but cutting, "I can't marry someone who humiliates her own sister to polish her own image." Gasps rippled like a wave. Callista froze. He didn't yell, he didn't point. He simply set the microphone down and walked away, past stunned family, past the coordinator waving her clipboard like a flag of surrender, past Callista's mother clutching her pearls. He left. Callista stood at the front, veil trembling slightly in the breeze, a still life portrait of undone perfection. No one moved to her side. Not even our mother. Elijah quietly packed up his binder. Didn't look back. I was by the river when Letty found me. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the water. I had taken my shoes off and stood barefoot in the soft grass, watching the current slip past, as if it knew how to carry burdens better than I did. She didn't say anything at first, just walked up beside me, her steps careful but determined. Then she handed me a small wooden box. "This belongs to you now," she said. I opened it. Inside was a single hairpin, gold, old, delicate. I remembered seeing it in photos of her mother, then her. A thing passed down, not for glamour, but meaning. "It's not because you fought," Letty said, voice low. "It's because you refused to disappear." I swallowed, but the knot in my throat didn't move. Back at the estate, the chairs were already being unstacked. The caterers had begun loading trays back into vans. The DJ stood silent behind his console, uncertain whether to play anything at all. One of the bridesmaids was crying, not for Callista, but from sheer confusion. Someone whispered, "This wasn't about love, it was about control." And control, when exposed, always unravels. I didn't return to the estate. There was nothing left for me there. Instead, I walked farther along the riverbank, hairpin in my palm, shoes dangling from my fingers. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anyone, wasn't holding anything together. I was just walking forward. By the time I made it back up the hill, the sky had softened into that pale blue-gray that comes just before evening. The estate, once alive with orchestras and champagne flutes, had gone still. Folding chairs leaned at odd angles, ribbons fluttered loose on table edges, and the floral arch that once stood with poise now listed slightly to one side, one corner drooping like a shoulder finally letting go. I didn't walk through it like I had before. I walked around, not because I feared anything inside, but because I didn't need to enter anymore. I had left the performance. What remained was cleanup, of truth, of ego, of illusion. Letty found me again, this time near the service driveway, where a line of vans idled as vendors packed up. She moved slower than before, but with that same deliberate steadiness. She didn't greet me with words. She just handed me a small envelope, creased, faded at the corners, the seal worn. "I found it in your father's dresser," she said quietly. "He wrote it a week before he passed. I wasn't sure when was the right time to give it to you, until now." I nodded and took it. Later, back in the quiet of my apartment, the one-bedroom walk-up where I returned after the estate gates had shut behind me, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter resting between my palms. The kettle hissed softly behind me, but I didn't get up. I needed this moment more than I needed tea. His handwriting was shaky but familiar, still curved the same way around the letter A. "Avira, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't get to say everything I should have. I saw more than you thought I did. I saw how much you carried, how often you let your sister shine while you stood behind her. Not because you lacked light, but because you believed in letting others feel seen. You did more than I ever asked of you. For your mother, for this family, for me. I'm sorry I didn't say this when it mattered. You deserved to hear it then. This family wouldn't have held without you. Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest for a long while. Not crying. Not breaking, just holding. The pain didn't leave, but it changed. It stopped being a thing I had to carry alone. That night, after cleaning up the scattered programs and wiping down the last smudge of mascara from the bathroom mirror, I pulled a shoebox from my closet. Inside it were keepsakes I had forgotten I even kept. A ticket stub from Callista's high school play, a recipe card in Mom's handwriting, a photo of me and Dad at the lake, both sunburnt and smiling. I added 2 things. The hairpin Letty had given me, once hers, once her mother's, now mine. And the letter. Neither needed a frame or fanfare, just space to exist. As I taped the box shut, I noticed the hem of the dress I had worn to the wedding. It hung near the closet, a small tear along the side where it had snagged on a thorny vine at the estate's edge. A fitting scar. It reminded me of the dress I had paid for, the one Callista cried about weeks before the wedding, claiming she couldn't afford the one she absolutely had to have. I had wired the money. No questions, no strings. She never said thank you. Now, somewhere in a corner of that garden, a torn satin hem likely lay discarded, unloved as the generosity that bought it. There was a knock at my door the following afternoon. I opened it to find Jonathan, tieless, jacket in hand, expression soft. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. I needed to say something to the one person who told the truth and never asked to be heard." He paused, then added, "You were the only real part of that wedding." I let him speak. I didn't offer him comfort, but I offered something else, a nod, a truth of my own. Some things don't need an audience to be true. He left quietly. That I appreciated. That evening, I opened my laptop. Not to write a memoir, not to drag anyone online. Just a few sentences in a blank document. This isn't a story about a broken glass. It's about the last time I let someone else define my worth. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But it was mine. The story ended at the estate, but I didn't. Sometimes the loudest form of love is silence, and sometimes walking away doesn't mean losing. It means finally choosing yourself. What would you have done if your family erased your name from your own story? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories, just like this one.